This is the Ancient and Medieval History Lesson for Friday, the 11th of February 2022. So it's 2-1-1-2-2. Switch from gaming one. So, you know what that means, don't you? I don't either.
Mr. Tenorio, guess what?
What?
Friday in French is vendredi.
What?
It's vendredi.
Vendredi?
Vendredi.
That was random.
Oh, that's wrong case, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. Then again, the French invented eating tasty snails and garlic butter.
Hey, this is
Now, I admit, escargot is a glorious and wonderful thing, but the first guy to try it must have been desperate. Yes.
I just heard from someone about half the French class may or may not be making you Valentine's Day cards.
Supposed to be a surprise. I do not know. They did this last year and I swore vengeance. But I got busy with other things. This year I may not get so busy.
I know.
Vengeance may come.
Now.
I don't know. There are all sorts of things I could do that would annoy the French. Insult wine. Spoil the cheese. I'm sorry, the fromage. In any event. Did you hear, by the way, about what Jack Bredesen and Austin Mankey did yesterday?
No.
They invaded, Jack was the criminal, and Austin was the copper. And they invaded my classroom, and apparently Mr. Hall's classroom as well, doing a chase. And Austin ended up getting Jack on the ground and started pounding him. And asked, "Are you going to go to the show? Are you going to go to the show?" I'd already bought tickets, so Jack was saved. But it was funny. It was well done. Okay. So, we have talked about the roles of Jesus. Now we're going to talk about the ways that we know about these roles, and that is, the Bible. Now, the Bible has two sections. The oldest and longest section is the Old Covenant, or the Old Testament. And the Old Covenant, or the Old Testament, deals with the stories of everything from the creation of the universe up through, depending upon which Bible you have, either somewhere during the late prophets' time after the Babylonian captivity, or up to the Maccabees. The Old Testament's about, I think, 3/4 of the Bible in terms of volume. Then there's the New Covenant, or the New Testament, which is the Christian part of the Bible. The Old Covenant, or the Old Testament, is the Jewish part of the Bible. And the New Testament has basically three sections. The first section is 4 books called Gospels. And these 4 books called Gospels, you are really wanting to giggle, aren't you? I can tell. You just have this look on your face like laughter is about to come out. You're barely holding it in. Glad you're so happy, I think. Unless it's at my expense. The Gospels tell the story of Jesus. After the Gospels is a historical book, I guess it's 4 sections, called the Acts of the Apostles. And the Acts of the Apostles, or the book of Acts, recounts the story of the earliest part of the church and the ministry of St. Paul. And the book of Acts was written by the same guy who did the Gospel of Luke. Then there are a series of letters called epistles. Epistle is a fancy word for letter. And these letters are mostly they're from Paul, who is the guy who bridges Judaism and Christianity. But there are letters from others, like James, brother of Christ, and Jude, and other apostles, and so on, or they're written in the name of apostles. So that's the third section. You got Gospels, you got a historical book, you got letters, lots of letters. And these letters talk about early church controversies, and they're there to try to guide people onto what mainline Christians believe. The last book is a prophetic book, the book of the Apocalypse, or the book of Revelations. And this book basically recounts all of the Old Testament prophecies about the day of the Lord and the millennium, particularly from the book of Daniel. Daniel is a very heavy prophecy book. And the book of Revelations basically summarizes all of the Jewish prophecies about the day of the Lord and the millennium and updates them to match with Christianity. Shh! Spoiler alert. The Bible has a happy ending. Now, when most people think of the apocalypse and the book of Revelations, they think of the end of the world. And it's a little about that. It is. It's the end of the world that is. It's the end of the, remember, millenarianism. The world that is totally corrupt. So it's got to end. And at the end times, there's all sorts of suffering and misery as the current world dies. Pain is a part of every birth. Just ask your mom; she'll tell you. Because my mom certainly did tell me. It's just part of life. And one of the first parts of life is there you are, an innocent baby, making your mom go ah, because pain, birth. It's part of life. So, laughter came out. That's good. But the book of Revelations isn't just about that. It also is about what happens after that. And what happens after that is the proverbial 1,000 years of peace, the millennium, where people who are righteous and God live together in the New Jerusalem. It's heaven on earth, it's earth in heaven. And then God fulfills his purpose and on to the next thing. So the Bible has a happy ending. It's hard to get that from some Christians. Some Christians are absolutely gloom and doom. Some Christians are obsessed with the book of Revelations. It just goes to show you that there are countless ways that you can approach religious faith. You can approach it optimistically, pessimistically, with courage and hope or fear. It has the whole gamut of human emotions just wrapped in and sort of amplified, turned up to volume 11, because you're projecting, you're imagining what God might be like, and what judgment might be, and what heaven or hell might be. In any event, we're going to focus on the 4 Gospels. And Gospels comes from the words good spell. I heard this once, as in good spiel. Spiel being a Germanic word for talk. So the Gospels are the good talk. Now, what I learned in religious class is a better translation from gospel to good speak or good talk is the good news. The good news that Jesus brings. So Christians, generally, not always, being optimistic, the fact that God cared enough about us to actually inhabit a human body for a while and go through all the stuff he did is good news, because that means God cares about us. If God didn't care about us, he wouldn't do that. It's like getting a nickname. I don't know how people get nicknames these days in the days of, online, blah, blah, blah. But in the olden days, if you were a guy and you were among the guys and you actually got a nickname from the guys, even if that nickname was Tiny or Pee-wee or Wine, even if it was an embarrassing name, it was a sign of affection. I mean, guys don't get all schmaltzy and, oh, I love you, man, and not unless they're very much in their cups. But what they do is if they care enough about you, they'll notice some quirks and they'll make fun of you. And that's a way of expressing, yeah, okay, we're together. It's a good thing we're okay. Tiny, Pee-wee, whatever. So getting a nickname, even if the nickname is stupid or embarrassing, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a pretty good thing. It means you're one of the guys. God caring enough to go through all this for us. Not just creation, not just animals, not just the heavens and the earth, but us. That's good news, according to Christians. So, the good spiel, or the good news of Christ. Now, there are 4 Gospels. But there are divisions between those Gospels. There are the 3 Synoptic Gospels, and there's the one odd man out. So what's a Synoptic Gospel? Well, they are the first 3, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But what they do is they synopsize, that is, summarize and recount, similar stories or even the same stories about Jesus. So the Synoptic Gospels tell the same stories in different ways. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this happen, but you got a group of friends, right? And all of them but you go off to do something. Maybe they're going on a camping trip. Maybe they're going out to Seattle to do something with somebody's family. And for whatever reason, you can't go. So they go on their trip, and you're home trip. And then they come back. And each of them feels the need to tell you how wonderful the trip was that you missed. God, it would have been great if you were there, but you weren't.
I've done that.
But they never tell the story the same way. They always tell the story differently. Why? Well, because people are not cameras. People are not microphones. People are not recording devices. Our memory is not linear. And so what we remember, and remember, this is a historian talking to you, okay? My whole thing is remembering stuff. That's what I do for a living. I remember things and I tell about it. It's a good job if you like that sort of thing, which I do. People remember things differently. And it's not just, hey, we all made fun of Pee-wee. It was great. They all made fun of me. It was terrible. You know, there's that perspective thing. But there's also the fact that different people notice different things and different things stick in their mind. They did a psychological experiment once on video. You can look it up on YouTube. Look up dance with gorilla.
Uh-oh.
And what there is there are a bunch of people who are dancing on camera, you know, old style ballroom type dancing with one another. And they were told that they were there in a psychological experiment to, I don't know, monitor something about how they were dancing and moving as couples. And about 2/3 of the way through this 5-minute video, as they're dancing, a guy in a gorilla suit just quietly walks through them, among them. Nobody notices. Nobody reacts. And he's gone. Now, the thing about guys in gorilla suits, the thing you really need to understand is people react. You know, when they were first testing jets over Muroc Lake in California, what's now Edwards Air Force Base, they were testing this lousy jet by Curtiss. But in any event, there's a test pilot. Test pilots have a sense of humor, sort of like cops and soldiers. And because most test pilots are soldiers. So there's this guy flying a plane, and he buzzes some propeller-driven aircraft. And the pilots are looking at him like, what the hell? Where's the propeller? Because planes all have propellers. And then there's this air-sucking, jet going by. So the test pilots talk among themselves, and they're going to have a little fun. So the next time they go up, they sneak along a gorilla mask. And just before they buzz the propeller planes, put on the gorilla mask over their gear. And then they swoop in and parallel the other guy. And the other guy's like... And you can see going through their mind, am I going to report this in? Am I going to report in that I'm watching a plane with no propeller flown by a gorilla? No, I'm not going to do that. So, guys mess with you. It's like on the first moon landing. Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin were going to land. Michael Collins was going to stay in orbit in the orbiter. That's the way they did it. 3 guys go to the moon, the ship split, 2 go down to the surface, 1 stays in orbit and greets them when they come back. At the party before they lift off the next day, Michael Collins says, have you thought about your first words on the moon? You know what they should be? Oh my God, what is that thing? Think about it. It's really funny. But he didn't do that. Instead, he says, 1 small step for a man, 1 giant leap for mankind, which is a great line. Some other guy said, you should have said Coca-Cola, and made money for the rest of your life. But he didn't do that. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So, you're going to get different stories from different people because different people notice things. Some people notice the dance partner. Some people notice the gorilla walking through the room. The Synoptic Gospels, well, I'll talk about them specifically. The book of John is the odd book out. Gospel of John. We'll get to that probably next week. So, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Luke are all based on the stories and sermons of St. Peter. Now, St. Peter is a middle-aged fisherman with a wife. And St. Peter, who is a middle-aged fisherman with a wife, is pretty much the oldest of Jesus' followers, of his apostles. He leaves his wife to go follow Jesus. Apparently he still somehow provides for her, sends money home, or there's an arrangement made because she doesn't starve to death. And Peter is an important Christian. In fact, Peter is arguably the very first Christian. Here's why. One of the ways that Jesus did his thing was so clever, I didn't know about it. I didn't even think about it until I was an adult. When I was a kid, and I heard about the story of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus saying, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," and all that stuff. And Jesus speaking to the crowds and telling stories. I thought it was about Jesus teaching the crowds. But it wasn't. Jesus teaching the crowds was secondary or even of tertiary importance. The people that chose to give up their lives and follow Jesus, and again, about a dozen of them, those were the people that Jesus was teaching. He had about 3 years with them. He traveled north, he traveled south. They were with him. They got to see Jesus up close. They camped with him. They ate meals with him. They saw him do his thing. Jesus, on a couple of occasions, says to them, "Go out and you do the preaching. We're not you. Do the preaching." And he tells them how to do it. He tells them, because he knows he's not going to be around very long. So they learned from Jesus by being with him. They learned from Jesus by hearing his speeches. They learned from Jesus by seeing what he does, by being there. They learned from Jesus also because Jesus says things to the crowds that the crowds don't understand. And afterwards, what do you mean? What do you mean? God is like a sower, like a guy tossing seeds into the air to land on the field. What the heck does that mean, Lord? Rabbi, teacher, master? And Jesus says, okay, you really don't get it? Lunkheads? Fine, I'll explain it to you. Some people are like the seeds that end up on the rocks. Very, very, very shallow layer of dust. And those seeds, I'm trying to tell it right, what those seeds do is they basically get scorched. There are other seeds that land in shallow soil, but they're very good soil. So the seeds suddenly spring up, and they're full of promise, but they're in shallow soil. So when their roots go down beyond a certain point, there's nowhere to go because rock. So and then they die, wither and die. What's that like? Well, that's like a person who goes to a revival meeting. And they go, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to change my life. It's going to be great." It's like the person who quits smoking or starts exercising or eating right. "Yeah, I'm going to change my life." That's all they can talk about. Oh, it's annoying. All they can talk about is their new diet or their new exercise plan. And, just because they've discovered it, you should try it too, right now. And yes, all of you. And then something happens and they're on to the next thing. Sometimes faith seems to be promising, but it's not. It's just a flash in the pan. Some people, some seeds are tossed in among the brambles, the thorns, the bushes. Those are the people who are tempted to join the faith, but they're consumed by the worries about life, like the roots and branches of the already existing plants. People can't get past paying their bills. People can't get past the idea of having a nice house or a nice cart or whatever. They're so consumed by the world that they don't think about eternity. And then there are the seeds that land in good soil, deep soil, rich soil. And those seeds may not come up as quickly, but they're the ones that are rooted deeply, and they're the ones that will last. They're the ones that will last through the entire season and produce good fruit. And the followers go, oh, okay, we understand now. Didn't understand before. Makes you wonder if the crowd understood. So was Jesus teaching the crowd? No. He was teaching his disciples. He was teaching his apostles. He picked a small group of dedicated people, and his primary lessons were to them. The crowds would come and the crowds would go, and some of them would be inspired, and some of them would just go on to the next thing. But those disciples, those apostles, stayed with him long enough. They cared enough to really, really, really pay attention. And near the end of his ministry, just before going to Jerusalem, around a campfire, Jesus asks these guys who've seen it all with him, okay, guys, you've seen it all with me. Who am I?
Mr. Janoria. Oh,
Anyway, what some of them say, in almost that same tone of voice, is, you're a great prophet. You're Elijah reborn. Elijah was one of the greatest Old Testament prophets. You are Elijah reborn. Come to show us the way. Elijah, a prophet. And as other people are muttering answers, Peter looks at him and says, you're the Messiah. You're the Christ. You're the Son of God. Jesus walks up to him, takes him by the shoulders, looks him in the eye, and says, Peter, you are the rock upon which I will build my church. Which is funny. Jesus has a sense of humor, because Peter is from Petrus, and Petrus means rock. It's like, hey, Rocky, you're the rock upon which I'll build my church. Peter means Rocky. There's a city in the Middle East where they filmed Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, that city with the pillars and columns in that narrow canyon. That's the ancient city of Petra. It's the ancient city of rock. So, Rocky, Peter, you are the rock upon which I will build my church. Peter is the first person to publicly recognize Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. He is the first Christian. He's the foundation stone of all other Christians. So Peter's kind of important.
He also betrays him 3
Well,
times.
I'm about to get to that. Now, Peter then says, well, we ought to do something. We ought to, yeah, because you're the Messiah. And Jesus looks at him, and it's like he's back in the desert being tempted by the adversary again. And he says, right after saying you're the rock, he says, get thee behind me, Satan. He calls Peter Satan, just after saying you're the rock. So Peter has his moments. Peter's one of these guys that's super enthusiastic. And if you get him started, he's just going to go. He's just going to go on his own thing because he's good attention. He's a good man, but he's a normal man. He's not a hero, not yet. So on the night of Jesus' arrest, Peter, his oldest follower, Peter, the first Christian, has the guts to follow Jesus after he's taken by the priest's troops. Now, the others don't do this. That's brave. The others scatter. Some find him later, but Peter is brave enough. Think about this. You're following some guy, and he gets arrested by the police. How much guts does it take to follow after the police in the dark? Because if they see Peter, they're going to arrest him too. So Peter goes and follows Jesus, and Jesus is being tried in the house of the high priest, which is a mansion. And it's got a public courtyard for all the clients to show up. And it's the middle of the night, but there are people there because there are doings in the high priest's house, and the clients should be there. So Peter is hanging out with the clients, and some other Christians show up to keep an eye, but Peter's the most prominent. And as the clients are talking, one woman looks over and says, "Hey, I know you. You're that guy that was with the other guy who's on trial. You're that guy." And Peter, you got the wrong leg. No, lots of guys look like me. And then somebody else comes up and says, "Yeah, somebody else looks like you." He said that in a Galilean accent. The guy on trial, Jesus of no whatever, is a Galilean. Of course you're the guy. You speak with a Galilean accent. You look like the guy that was with him. I'm not the guy. And then a group of people, but you clearly are the guy. Look, you looks like you, sounds like you, dresses like you. I don't know him. And Peter storms off. Now, why this is weird is that during dinner the night before, Jesus tells the story of what's going to happen, and they don't understand. In fact, Jesus says, predicting Judas's betrayal, "One of you will betray me tonight." And they all say, no, I wouldn't betray you. And Peter's the loudest, "I'm not going to betray you." And Jesus says, "Peter, before the dawn, before the cock crows, you'll deny me not once, not twice, but 3 times. No, I'll never do that." Well, he does. And then he goes away in shame. But after that moment of shame, he comes back. We all mess up. And he's with the Christians in the room after Jesus is buried, wondering what's going to happen next. Well, Peter's going to become the leader of the new Christian community. As Christ's physically oldest follower, as the guy who did all this silly stuff, Peter is the one they all look to for leadership. And when it seems like Jesus has raised from the dead, Peter goes out after the women and he tries to figure out what's going on. Peter becomes the leader of the Christian faith. And he spends his time in Judea and beyond, eventually, telling stories of Jesus. Those stories of Peter become the basis of the Gospels of Matthew, of Mark, and of Luke. The same stories of Peter, written down by different people, heard in different order, in different ways, is what makes up 3/4 of the story of the life of Christ. So Peter is an incredibly important Christian. And Peter, at the end of his life, goes to Rome, the center of the world, it's the Roman Empire, and he becomes the leader of the Christian community in Rome, which is the first pope. Peter is the first bishop, episcopos, of Rome. And all Roman bishops afterwards are successors to St. Peter. And this is one of the reasons why the Roman Catholic Church says that the Pope's authority is special, because the Pope is a descendant of the very first bishop of Rome, who was St. Peter, who was Christ's chief apostle, or at least a leading apostle. Okay. A lot there. Let's start with the Gospel of Matthew. It's the first one that appears. Now, back in the Middle Ages, there was a special iconography of these books. In other words, the books had pictures on them. Actually, this iconography goes back to late Roman times. And the Gospel of Matthew, its symbol is the lion. Now, what's a lion? Big, loud, king of the beasts. Lion. The Gospel of Matthew has a purpose. Yes, its origin is the stories of Peter. The Gospel of Matthew is supposedly written by Matthew the tax collector, who was the man who everyone said, "Don't let this tax collector join you, Jesus. He's a scumbucket. He's a tax collector. They're the worst people ever." And Jesus says he's willing to come. If he's willing to come, I'm willing to have him. Well, this same Matthew is supposed to be the author of the Gospel of Matthew. But, like a lion, What Matthew's gospel is, primarily, is the gospel to the Jewish people. Matthew starts his gospel with the genealogy of Jesus. The genealogy of Jesus is also told in the Gospel of Luke. In Matthew's Gospel, the genealogy goes through Joseph, all the way back to David, all the way back to Moses and to Abraham and to Noah and to Adam and Eve. So Jesus' heritage through Joseph, who was his foster father, is the way Matthew starts the book. And then Matthew, again and again and again, shows an event from the life of Jesus and connects it to an Old Testament event. He shows the life of Jesus as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. He shows the life of Jesus as the culmination of what the Jews were expecting. What Matthew is doing, the purpose of his gospel, which is something you really should remember, is Matthew is trying to prove that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. That's his overall point. And he does so like a lion roaring. He does with pride. Now, there are many Jewish scholars and some Christian scholars who have found fault with the way Matthew makes his arguments. They see Matthew taking things out of context. They see Matthew emphasizing things that the ancient Jews never would have intended to try to make the connection. But Matthew's purpose is to demonstrate to Jewish people that the Messiah has come, and the Messiah was Jesus of Nazareth, Joshua bar Joseph, Yeshua. The oldest gospel, a gospel that Matthew probably used to help organize his thoughts. The oldest gospel is the Gospel of Mark. Mark supposedly was a young follower of Jesus, not really an apostle, but a young follower of Jesus. The iconography of the Gospel of Mark, the symbol, is a man. Not a lion, glorious, powerful, roaring out its truths, but a humble man, just a guy. The Gospel of Mark is the plainest of them. It's the shortest of them. It tells the basic story of Jesus. The tie I was wearing yesterday with the mud in the eyes, that was straight out of the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark has these weird little details that the others have left off. And because it's the oldest Gospel, the many scholars and theologians believe that it's probably closest to the truth. It's like if you ask somebody how their fishing trip was the day after they get back, they'll be able to tell you a whole lot. If you ask them 6 months from now, they'll be able to tell you the high points. If you ask them 2 years from now, fishing trip? I went on a fishing trip. Unless they keep a diary, they're not going to remember. So the idea of getting freshest news, like eating fresh bread, is important. Mark is the freshest of the Gospels. It's written first. It's the simplest of the Gospels. It goes over the stories in a basic, bare-bones fashion. I actually recommend, if you've never read the Old Testament or if you want to read it again, not to start with Matthew. Matthew, for somebody who's not familiar with the Bible, can be annoying in that he goes off into these very long genealogies. Who cares who begat who? In Jewish lore, it matters. Who cares if Jesus is the fulfillment of this obscure Jewish prophecy? Well, if you're Jewish, it matters. But if you're just a Christian, I would strongly recommend starting with the Gospel of Mark. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's easy to follow, and it gets to the heart of the Christian message. My own thought. The Gospel of Luke. First of all, Luke was a doctor. Luke was a physician. Understand that means Luke was educated. Luke wasn't a fisherman. Luke wasn't a tax collector who knew how to read and write and count, but no, Luke had a real education. Arguably, the most beautiful Greek in the whole New Testament, the New Testament is written in Greek, not Hebrew, not Aramaic, but Greek. The most wonderful Greek in the entire New Testament is in the beginning of the Gospel of Luke. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. And Luke talks about Jesus as the Word God used to create. In Genesis, God speaks and creates with his words, "Let there be light." And that word, "Let there be light," that is what becomes Jesus. That word of God that reaches out from him and makes and shapes and creates and changes. The hand of God, the word of God, the magic spell of God. That's Jesus. And Luke explains this. So Luke writes in the most beautiful, elegant Greek you're going to see in the New Testament. The others sort of talk, plain. But Luke, cultivated, cultured, educated man. But that's not all. Luke's symbol is the lamb. Now, I don't know if you've ever had enough contact with farm animals to know how cute a lamb is. But imagine kitten, puppy, little, just cute. Lambs are cute. Lambs are also a symbol of innocence. They have wool, but it hasn't had much of a chance to get dirty yet. So lamb's wool is just bright white. Now they're sheep. I mean, they do what sheep do. But in ancient pagan religion and Jewish religion, the lamb is one of the perfect sacrifice animals. Because with a lamb, what you're sacrificing is a sheep that will grow up. Well, it's not going to grow up now because you're going to sacrifice it. You're sacrificing all the wool that sheep would produce, all the milk that sheep would produce. You can make cheese out of that. All the the kids, the little lambs that sheep might have if it's a female. That whole future is gone. You can eat mutton, which is adult sheep, but mutton is gamey. Mutton has a strong taste that's not to everyone's taste. If you don't grow up eating mutton, like the British tend to eat a lot of mutton. If you don't grow up eating mutton, you're not probably going to like it. Probably. It just is going to seem off. Like the meat is so filled with some kind of hormone. Yeah?
You have to add a lot, like rosemary and thyme.
Yeah, and mint jelly is nice too. But lamb, and actually I had lamb chops last night. Lamb is tender. Lamb has a little bit of that flavor, but not too much. Lamb is much nicer, but you get it in much smaller portions. So the sacrifice of a lamb is considered one of the things that you want to do at some point in your life. You want to invest in buying a lamb, an unblemished lamb, a perfect lamb, the kind of lamb that you should give to God. Remember the story of Cain and Abel. Cain gives the leftovers, Abel gives the good stuff. So a lamb, an unblemished lamb, is the good stuff. Why does the Gospel of Luke call the lamb? Because Luke is not trying to prove Jesus is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. And Luke is not just telling the basic story. What Luke is doing is explaining how Jesus' entire life was a life of sacrifice. And that the end of Jesus' life was a willing sacrifice. Jesus is the Lamb of God who will take away the sins of the world. That's a line that I'm going to say again, because it's an important part of Christian belief. The Lamb of God who will take away the sins of the world. As if the Lamb takes on all the sins of everyone who ever has been born, is alive at that time, or ever will be born, onto itself, and allows itself to be slaughtered. And by taking on all those sins, and by accepting being a sacrifice, saving everyone else. So Luke's story, as only a healer can tell it, is the story of how Jesus' life and death and resurrection was all about sacrifice, and how that heals the world and heals all the people of the world. I'm not a healer. I can only imagine what it's like to find a person in trouble, and with my hands and with my skill, make them better. That's not my thing. Those people who have that gift amaze me. Luke had that gift. And so Luke emphasizes Jesus' healing miracles because he understands them as a healer does. I mean, yeah, he's a healer 2,000 years ago. He doesn't know what germs are. He doesn't know what keeping things sanitary is. He doesn't, necessarily wash his hands. He's not a modern doctor, but he is a healer. He does the best he can with the knowledge he has. Here's the other thing about the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke is the gospel of women, children, and slaves. Why? Because Jesus, in this gospel particularly, but in all the gospels, spends time with unimportant people, with nobodies, with people who everyone else just assumes, just takes for granted. The Iliad and the Odyssey are about heroes. Not every man is a hero. Women can't be heroes. They can be sorceresses. I guess Penelope was a hero, but in the old Greek legends, aside from Atalante and other people like her, no, for the most part, women are not heroes. And children are little, rugrat, grubby things until they grow up and become men or women. Slaves, legally and morally, aren't even people anymore. But in Luke's gospel, Jesus invites the children to come to him, and he talks and tells stories to them. He says, be like a child. Make your faith like that of a child, simple, uncomplicated, innocent. He treats women like people. This, by the way, is one of the huge changes in human society that the West gives. Because of Jesus' willing to treat women like people, Christian Western civilization begins more and more to consider the possibility that women are something other than the servants of men and the mothers of babies. Every feminist, every person who believes that women have a value equivalent to men, that they are people like men, owes something, whether they like Jesus or not, to Christ and to the Christian church. Because the Christian church is the first institution in any civilization that makes this claim that all people, not just heroic men, all people, women, children, even slaves, all people are children of God.
There is a theory surrounding some of the Gospels by, Mary Magdalene was apparently with the disciples the entire way, but she's not considered an apostle because she was a woman. So even though Jesus was preaching to them, the theory is that Mary Magdalene was one of the apostles to Jesus, but because of biases of the time, she wasn't mentioned.
That's entirely possible. I will say, there are things that critics of Christianity and Judaism and Islam say that don't take into account human nature or history. Let me explain. A scientist will say, well, look at Genesis. Genesis doesn't tell the story of creation as science has explored it. I mean, there's the let there be light and the Big Bang, but the Big Bang... Why didn't the Bible tell that the world was round and that there was only one planet and that we orbited the sun? I can't talk to you in a language you don't understand. The purpose of the Bible is not to tell how science works. It's not to explain the physical universe. The purpose of the Bible is to assert there is a God, He is the author of life, and that you should be good and loving in His service. That life has meaning, and that you're accountable for your choices. I could go on, but those are the basic lessons. if suddenly a prophet starts preaching modern science to ancient Middle Eastern shepherds, it's going to go nowhere. Oh, yeah, the world is round. Lock him up. Oh, we're one planet. We're like Venus or Mars up there. Lock him up. People are not capable of suddenly going from an ancient mindset to a contemporary mindset in one leap. It doesn't work. So the mere fact that Jesus does do his thing and that Luke emphasizes the mercy and compassion of Christ is a huge step. Expecting that to go further and to include, and I don't know if that theory is true, but I'm entertaining it as if it is, going on to then have a female disciple, having her around the outer edges is fine. Making her a central figure is not. Now, I will say, before I get to you, George, there is a reason why it's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. There is a reason why it's not God the Parent. There's a reason why it's not God the Mother. The Jewish faith exists in a context of paganism. And paganism still has the echo of the old Earth Mother cults, which is subsumed in Olympian gods with the goddess Demeter, or Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, and the goddess of the harvest. And goddess cults tend to be farming oriented, and they tend to involve human sacrifice. One of the things that distinguishes Judaism is from the beginning, God is seen not as a parent, not as a mother, but as a father. So there's even a section, there's an old Jewish prayer where you're thanking God for not being born a slave, for not being born crippled, for not being born a woman. This is a prayer a lot of feminists bring up to talk about how evil monotheism is. No, it's the way people thought. So what I would argue is, I could say all sorts of things, but I'm not going to. It's, you cannot build Rome in a day, and you cannot build the modern mindset in an ancient person, not in a single generation. It takes a lot of time. Anyway, I don't know if that's an answer, but go on, and then I'll go to George.
Yeah, that's kind of what the theory is that Mary Magdalene was a part of the disciples, but because of human nature and biases, when most of the men were writing the Gospels, they didn't include her in because of that mindset.
Yeah. Well, there's also this, too, and I feel the need to say it because it's... thank you, George. I appreciate your patience. Traditionally, men pursue. Women are pursued. So men have to do things in order to impress the women. Be strong, be brave, be a good dancer, be charming, be nice, be chivalrous. Produce a living wage so that the women know that them and their children are going to be safe. All this traditional stuff are on men. So men see life and see all this work as a means to a greater end. Because women are traditionally the pursued, women are the end, as well as a means. And there is a sense among certain types of women, female personalities, that they are the great treasure in life. And this is truly an obnoxious frame of mind. To deal with a woman who, because she's beautiful, or because she's rich and beautiful, or because she's charming, rich and beautiful, who actually takes on the air of a queen or a princess or a goddess or something. It's just nasty to be around. I don't know if you've ever known someone like this, but it's a traditional archetype harpy woman personality. I mean, men have thuggery, men have personality quirks that are bad too. But a man is almost never, unless he's completely delusional, going to think that he is the be-all and end-all of life. But a woman, because she's pursued, can. I don't know if that makes any sense. If it does, fine, it doesn't have to. I said it. It's stuck in your mind. You'll think about it. Maybe.
I was just going to say that, Galileo suggested the fact that the Earth might orbit the Sun. instead of the son born in the earth.
Yeah, this is 1600 odd years after Christ.
And then he got locked up and put in house arrest.
Yeah. Well, we're going to tell this story next year. Galileo was an obnoxious, arrogant jerk. I mean, yeah, he was brilliant and the science, but people in the church come to him and say, yeah, you're right. Jesuit priests have confirmed a lot of your assertions. Look, the world is rift by a religious war, and we don't need more confusion. Write in Latin, talk to scholars, and your discoveries, but don't try to shout to the high heavens to common people. You'll just confuse them. Galileo then writes a book, Discourse on the Universal Systems, where he places the church's position of geocentrism as the character simplicio, which means stupid. So Galileo basically he gives the middle finger to the Church of Rome in Italy, where there's an Italian Inquisition. Not smart. But yeah, no, it takes time for people to... And again, the point isn't physics. The point is not astronomy. The Bible's point is morality.
Yeah.
We'll talk... okay. So yeah, I've talked about the Gospel of Luke as being the gospel of women and slaves and children. And I guess we'll leave it there. Any last minute questions, comments, or thoughts? Yeah.
How do you say that the gospel is that handed from slaves and children?
Yeah.
Like, I know that most of the information that God was from. Like, she kind of knew his personal life.
She knew of it, yeah. No. Luke would listen to it. A lot of guys wouldn't. What was it? Yes. I'm a Trinitarian Christian. I do believe one God with three aspects. I am a monotheist, but I do believe in the three aspect thing. I know some Unitarians. It's a different way of looking at it. How about you, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't believe in
Thank you.
three separate beings.
Okay.
As like a godhead. I don't really understand why
people
choose between like Satan, the Holy Ghost, and himself to see who's going to be like the Messiah.
Well, I don't think he ever considered Satan, but maybe we have a different tradition.
Satan had like his own idea to force people to take away. That's why he wasn't chosen, so he kind of rebelled. Yeah.
That to me comes from a book and a set of books and traditions which I personally am not either familiar with or devoted to. But it's a good story. I'm not going to deny it. It's a different way of looking at it. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you. See you later.
Have a good day.
You too.
Oh, have a good weekend.
Oh, yeah, you too.